tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head and the billies and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This time we we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This time we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time my name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head and the Belize.
Good morning. Behind the scenes of the XTV studio, I'm just saying the news. Mutota and our soon-to-be resident guest girl, turn regular now, brother, Doc Toivo Asheeke. Morning, brothers. How the morning? I'm not hearing them. Christy? I'm not hearing them. I can't hear you. Not hearing them. So, even though I can't hear you, Brother Akko, go ahead and make us start the Caribbean news segment for this week. Anything I could hear or not, I want to give it a thumbs up. I cannot hear you all. Go ahead, Brother Akko. Christy will work it out. No. Go ahead, Brother Akko. I can barely hear you. Barely. I'm not hearing anything. Brother Akko, go ahead and read your story. Yes, I'm hearing you a little better, but you keep going. Christy, I'm not hearing it loud enough. Yes, go ahead, Brother Akko. You go ahead. I'm barely hearing him. He sounds far away. Sis, pull that fan more to the left so I can see the monitor.
And this article is very important in the context of what is happening in the Caribbean with the challenges to the sovereignty of the Caribbean posed by the United States presence and its capture of the kidnapping of the president of Venezuela. The Caribbean is under tremendous pressure. Some states have been coerced into supporting an illegal activity against Venezuela, particularly my own country, Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm going to read the article a bit and have Brother Toivo comment on it and Sister YaYa as the case may be. So the article, the headline of this article from a couple of days ago is "No one is coming to save us. the Caribbean's reckoning. I read a couple of paragraphs. The last 12 months have been an education, not in what we hoped, but in what we should have known. We watched the Trump administration assert America first with a bluntness that left no room for ambiguity. We watched Canada and Europe accommodate, recalibrate, defer until Greenland was threatened, until a NATO ally was in the crosshairs. Then suddenly sovereignty mattered. Strategic autonomy became urgent. Decades of comfortable assumptions dissolved in weeks, and I've had to revisit my worldview. The lesson for the Caribbean could not be clearer. No one is coming to save us. Not Washington, which sees us as backyard or an afterthought. Not London, which long ago moved on. Not Ottawa, which has its own recalibrations underway. Not Brussels, which discovered its own vulnerability and has no bandwidth for ours. The rules-based international order we were told to trust has revealed itself as a convenience for the powerful, suspended the moment it became inconvenient. We are on our own. The question is whether we will finally act like it. The closing migration valve is only the most visible symptom of these deeper exposure. For 3 generations, a critical plank of Caribbean's unspoken economic policy was to export our most ambitious people and import their remittances. Every August, the airports tell the story. Young graduates with boarding passes to Toronto, Miami, London. So I'll stop here and have you all comment on this particular article. No one is coming to save us. That's the headline.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. No, that headline I think is very apropos. Um, and I think on one level, the question, there are two questions that for me really came from the Venezuela question, right? Is we have always known about the level of force that the imperialists are able to use, particularly in some of these operations, right? One of the things I was comparing it to was sort of like a slave raid. Say what you want to say about the Europeans, they're very good at that. Going in and quickly and then taking out extraction, particularly in the U.S. context, right? And on the one hand, what I was really thinking about was the question then comes on the one hand, there's the question of can you stop these things? But the second question that I think is more important is what does this say about your movement and the structures of your movement, right? Because if things fall apart, it means it wasn't a strong movement to begin with. If the head can be cut off and then the snake dies. Hence, they say the multi-headed hydra, right? To think of now, what does it mean if one falls multiple, right? And so, indeed, the question is, no one is coming to save us except ourselves, right? And then the question, of course, that naturally must flow: what are the class forces? What are the social forces, the cultural forces, the grassroots forces in a particular combination in different parts of the Caribbean, as well as the wider African world, right? That need to mobilize and organize themselves to protect ourselves, right? And then what does protection mean, right? Part of some of the debates I've been having with some of the leftists that I've been moving around with here, in some of the just places here and there, not so much in public yet, but just here and there, from where I'm located in Atlanta and in the wider U.S., as well as some of the social networks on the continent, is okay. Let's say right now these French or the Americans take Ibrahim Traore. Will the AES fall apart or will it not? That should be the question. Is it a strong movement or is it not? Right? And strength must be seen in a different kind of sense than necessarily strong leaders. I think that's sort of maybe what I also am hearing from this article and sort of gesturing, right? Yes, you can have strong leaders, but I think as Ella Baker correctly said, strong people don't need strong leaders, right? Strong communities do not need strong leaders, right? And so really, if no one is coming to save us, that means we must invest more strongly in ourselves and the social forces, class forces, perhaps that have not had some of the seats at our own tables that maybe they deserve. So that's sort of what I think of when I think of these things: is are our movement strong enough? Are we able to now maneuver when these kinds of things happen, or do we fall apart when the quote unquote heads of our movements are being killed?
Respect, brother. I don't know who it is that said, no one is coming to save us but ourselves. And we have always been in a vulnerable situation because many of us don't know ourselves, so therefore we cannot collectively save ourselves. And there aren't many movements that are really, people are quick to use the word movements, but there aren't many movements. I mean, is there really a left? We have people who identify as left when it's convenient for them sometimes. They may identify as left in theory. They're good at being armchair revolutionaries. But how many genuine leftist movements do we really have globally? And especially in the Caribbean region, Brother Akka would be in a better position to speak on that, that we have to know who the genuine leaders are. And if we were doing what we were tasked to be doing, then we would be organizing from the bottom up. And we would know how important it is to know who we are. Because if we don't know who we are, anybody else will define us. So most of these Caribbean countries are saying that they're independent. They never were. Many of these Caribbean countries are saying they're democratic spaces. They never were. So if we wrongly analyze our status as a nation, as a people, then we will have problems moving forward in situations like these. I recently went to Cuba, and I've talked to Brother Akka about this. And one of the things that I just thought was absolutely powerful at the time of the revolution is that the group of people in the revolution who were leading it, including Comrade Fidel Castro and others, is that they saw the importance of literacy. A literate population is hard to control or manipulate. Many of us within these communities are not knowledgeable, and I'm not talking formal education. I'm talking about studying consistently, understanding systems, understanding our individual responsibility and our collective responsibility for our liberation. So that's my 2 cents, brother. I come here we got for say about that.
Well, we had movements. You know, the Caribbean has always had movements from the post-emancipation period, even to the post, what we call independence period, which is a term I use sort of loosely, the post-independence. We had movements. The fact that we had the revolution in Grenada, it stemmed out of movements, several movements in Grenada, which merged to form the New June movement. Then in Trinidad and Tobago, we had National Joint Action Committee, which by itself, the name, this was a movement of trade unions, revolutionary students or progressive students and so on. So we had movements. And throughout the Caribbean, we had the ACLM in Antigua, or throughout the Caribbean. What has happened post the Grenada Revolution, the collapse of the Grenada Revolution, and even before that, we had what progressive forces, and I know in our organization in Trinidad, we discussed what was called the counterattack. In that once the revolutionary movement gained prominence especially in the English-speaking Caribbean, there was a move afoot to disrupt it and destroy it. So in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, very draconian laws were passed, one called the Public Order Act, to limit, and these laws are still in place today. To hold a public meeting, you have to get permission from the Commissioner of Police. You must do this 24 hours. So all of these mechanisms were put in place to disrupt and undermine the movement of the progressive movement of the Caribbean people. What has happened since then is that we have not been able to recover from that period. And we have not been able to find new ways or new approaches to mobilizing and organizing people. So what you have people doing some things here and doing some things there. So the movement has to some extent collapsed. Now, this particular article by this academic is coming from a position, I think, while it's well intentioned, it's not coming from a position where the people are involved. I think when he says we, I think he's speaking more in terms of the Caribbean elite, right? Not from the position of the people, and that is how I see that. Yeah, so we did have movements, and our movements have collapsed not on their own, through errors, through attacks, counterattacks, the undermining of individuals, the penetration of organizations, and so on. So, what has to happen now is that we must find new ways and new approaches to once again mobilize the people from the Caribbean from the ground up, as Sarah James always would say.
Respect. You want to add anything else, Brother Toivo?
Yeah, maybe very briefly, then we can jump off. Jump to the next, maybe to something different, or we will continue. When I was in the Bronx, New York, one of my comrades who passed away, a few years ago, one of the plans we had in the Bronx to organize was that, again, as you know, it's a diaspora community, right? Many people are very tied into what's happening in Dominican Republic, in Puerto Rico, in Jamaica, in Haiti, or different parts of where people were coming from. And some of what we were planning to do is that in that 2020 moment, sort of what I would call the end of BLM and sort of the possibilities for other things to create. One of the things we were really to mobilize is how do you mobilize things at the grassroots level in the Bronx that also connect to things people are mobilizing with back in Dominican Republic. So some of the things, for example, those of you who know the Trujillo regime, for example, the Trujillo, I think his grandson or something like this, actually is a slumlord in the Bronx, which means that what does it actually mean to mobilize at that level people there, and then also at home some of the similar things you see. So like Barika Gold was one of the things we were talking about, protesting, and figuring out ways to go at their local manifestations in the diaspora, if you will, New York City, the Bronx, right? Those areas, and from that also use it as a way to connect with particular struggles, in the Caribbean back home, right? So not saying it's like again, things never really got off the ground with that project as much as we wanted, but part of also, I think of Walter Rodney and the Six Pack in 1974, and sort of the article he sort of writes before slash comes out maybe afterwards, right? Particularly when the Black Power cats in the Caribbean are denied the right to speak, and to present at the Six Pack in Tanzania, right? I mean, this goes back even to that, right? Is what does it mean, if these grassroots forces already in the 1970s are being kicked out if you're having an insurgent voice in these particular ways? And so I think at some level we do have to have a discussion of our allegiance in a post-Cold War era. What does it mean to think about that in the particular ways? And I really hope the people, the Lulas and the people in Colombia are watching, because if he can take Maduro, he can take you too. And the reason in Brazil you won't be able to stop him. And so Lula, the question is, where is your power base aligned? And I think even the elites themselves, I think, have to have their own come to Jesus moment. Is that you are very low on the totem pole in imperialism.
Respect. How many stories you have this week, Brother Akko?
So, Sarah, was about 10.
Let's get going then.
So I would read this one. This other story is out of Guyana, right? Very interesting article. It's a newspaper article in Guyana, and it's called "A Gangster's Eye View of Global Power." And that's the headline. And apparently, it's a person out of India who put this in the Guyanese paper, who wrote this article. So the article begins with, there is a method behind the apparent madness of US President Donald Trump's transactional spheres of influence approach to geopolitics and the global economy. Nowhere has this logic been clearer than in his administration illegal abduction of Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro and his ongoing effort to secure control of the country's oil reserves by installing a client regime. At the core of Trump's revival of the Monroe Doctrine, or the Donroe Doctrine as he has rebranded it, lies the belief that the United States can act with impunity within its self-defined backyard and other major powers, particularly China, can do the same in theirs. At the same time, the US reserves the right to advance its strategic interests wherever it sees fit, including Greenland. This approach, aptly described by Indian economist Prabhat Patnaik as gangster imperialism, harks back to capitalism's colonial roots when overt hierarchies among peoples and polities were based on relative power. Setting aside the profound moral and legal issues raised by Trump's strategy, can it actually work? Can carving up the world among major powers deliver a more stable and dynamic capitalism at a time when the global economy appears increasingly volatile and rudderless? If history is any guide, the answer is no. Over the past 2 centuries, capitalism has oscillated between periods of intense conflict among competing states and phases in which a single dominant superpower acted as both rule maker and enforcer. In the 19th century, that role was played by the United Kingdom, which built a colonial empire larger than those of its European rivals. Since the mid 20th century, the US has largely occupied this position. While hegemony never meant an absence of war, it did limit large scale inter imperialist conflicts of the kind that preceded World War One, famously described by Vladimir Lenin as wars in which state backed private capital fought for control over economic territory. And I will stop here. So, interesting. Gangster, gangster imperialism, gangster capitalism. And before Toivo comment, I want to say that this is why Kim Jong Un called off the talks with the US when they were trying to establish relationship. He said that when the former director of the CIA, Pompeo, approached him, he said that he was acting like a gangster, and he refused to deal with gangsters. So anyway, your comment.
Yeah, no, that makes that makes sense. The way I sort of try to I've been trying to explain some of these things, as I talk to some of my people, about some of the things that are happening. If we think of gangster imperialism, we do need to break down the details of some of these things, because it means one thing to some people and others, they don't know gangster, so they don't know the difference. And I think it's interesting because what it also shows is, I think, in a way, if you think about it, right, it is showing the weakness and the breakdown of U.S. hegemony and power, because literally the reality is that they're going for a particular overwhelming show of force precisely to reduce long-term conflict. The argument with is to go on a heavy hit raid quick, you see, and then to extract, right? As a way to also minimize their own casualties and their own costs of war, right? Hence the idea of gangster imperialism, right? Actually is very much, if we break that down, in my opinion, it is very much a very clear indicative sign of collapse. Because the reality is, and we know, because they've been reading our guerrilla struggle books, you actually can't deal with a long-term struggle. It actually isn't cost effective. You actually cannot put boots on the ground in Venezuela. American soldiers will die, a lot of them. You may get, at the end of the day, you may get something, but they call it a Pyrrhic victory. And particularly these days, with how sharp these margins are, you can't mess around. Even with their current action, the oil companies are not necessarily convinced, because even if the regime was willing, it's $100 billion investment minimum over 10 years, just to see if they can get it up to a particular standard. You see, that's why even with Trump, it's like almost like a quick money grab, quick thing, right? Because the reality is, in the long term, you actually can't sustain these things either in your own base, in terms of a lengthy struggle, but also just in the terms of how much these things cost to do some of these things. You can't drone warfare this, like with what's happening, in other places in the world. So, to break down the gangster imperialism for me, it's a straight sign of weakness. I mean, come on, you're going to Greenland and you're going to bully the Greenlanders and the Danes. Is this what U.S. imperialism has come to? I mean, on the reals. I mean, like, you go to the Danes. This is not the 12th century. That Denmark is gone. But you're strong because you can push the Danes around. Come on. And so I think, and, even the Venezuela situation, right? They have to work with Delcy Rodriguez because they understand that as much as they do not like this regime, they are in power and they are entrenched, and they do. You see, and so in some ways, I also look at it as a weakness that they betray in some ways. And many of the hawk Republican old schools here in the U.S., they also see it as weakness too, and they don't like it either. Funny, ironically, the old school George Bush Jr., Dick Cheney imperialists, these killers, they do not actually like some of these things, right? Actually.
Big respect. Two things that come to mind for me. Usually, when they're gangsters, they would have more than one gangster on the block. There's an opposing force. And it would appear, and both of you could tell me if I'm wrong, that the only opposing force right now is China. And I don't know if the president had thought about the impact of some of the choices he's making as it relates to trade and as it relates to gangster imperialism, what the impact of that would be. So imagine if there was no China, the situation we'll be in globally. So, okay, there's a China on the block, so we have two gangsters. Now, when in any war, it's the people who pay the biggest price. That's for sure. But what's interesting within gangster imperialism is that there's still Cuba. And the way they fight the war is very different and has been different, which is why they've lasted for over 60 years. And this is why now within gangster imperialism, the game changer has been, because of these recent tariffs on Cuba, this is really genocide. Like, this has never happened before. It's the Cuban people are suffering. So I wanted to get both of your input on the other gangster on the block is China. And I mean, if they're we're working within an imperialist system. I mean, what, we're picking which gangster would be the worst? So I want to get your take on China being the other gangster. And two, one of the game changer in this gangster imperialism war is what they have now done to Cuba and her people.
Well, let me slightly disagree with you. China is not a gangster country. It is not an imperialist country. It has never been an imperialist country. It has never tried to impose its way on other people. Okay, so I will slightly deviate from that perspective. China has demonstrated a capacity to be sovereign, which is what is the situation in Cuba. The reason, for example, in the English-speaking Caribbean and other countries, they are so, what you may call, scared by what is happening is because they are not sovereign. Our so-called independence and all of that never gave us sovereignty. As the Ghanaian scholar who was at UWI, Professor Adu, said, it's a question of adjustments and continuities. That's what happened. The colonial system gave way to so-called independence, but it was just a continuation of the same system. The economic models, the political models, the social models, the legal framework, all of it was just a continuation with variables of the colonial system. So that's the first thing. I think why Cuba has survived is because Cuba has given premium to sovereignty, whereas in the English-speaking Caribbean, where we are from, they have never developed in the population, either through our education systems, social systems, any idea of sovereignty. And I think this is where the contradictions exist relative to Cuba and to what is happening in the other parts of the Caribbean. And this is something that I am concerned about with Venezuela. In my view, the fact that the president could be captured so easily is a blow to the sovereignty of Venezuela. That's my commentary on that.
Brother Toivo?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I would say is with the Chinese thing is that the Chinese are a convenient boogeyman, right? I mean, 1 year, China, and then it's Russia, and then it's someone else, and then it's the weakness of NATO. So to your point, I think that what I would say it does do is China is a convenient straw man as you were for some of these things, right? And I think Trump has a good handle of the Chinese, in terms of he understands who he's dealing with. He knows they're not going to go to war immediately over Venezuela, neither over Greenland, right? And so I think that he uses that because in the U.S. context, you have to sort of legitimize some of these things. And then even in the NATO context, right, is to like legitimize, China is this big thing, Russia is this, so you need us, etc. I mean, even you have the NATO head. I find it funny, these imperialists, how they move sometimes, because you even the Venezuelan opposition leader. I back to the idea of gangsterism. If we take gangsterism seriously, gangsters don't respect cowards. And literally, you're going to come up here and you're going to give this Nobel Peace Prize, and you still are out of power, hoping this man will help you. He doesn't respect you. You know what I mean? Even NATO, the head of NATO, literally just now is saying that NATO is nothing without the United States and can't defend itself without the United States in public. And then you want people, if we're talking about gangsters don't respect people like that. They just take more from them. Later on. And so even from your even so, if we're going to take this metaphor, let's really take it. And I think with the Cuban example, I agree. I also would argue Cuba in a way similar-ish to Haiti and Jamaica and some others. And some others. What's interesting about some of these larger islands is that also a lot of the autonomous life, not even autonomous, a lot of the culture produced and forged within the fires of slavery actually have created a population that have been able to actually live outside of particular capitalist relations, even after the ending of slavery, and if you will, even after colonialism. People were able to survive. People were able to try to live off the land, which is why they have been attacking some of these places so strongly. I think even YaYa in some of his new work, well, not new work, sort of like reforging of some of his older work with newer ideas and some of his things, talking about the Guyanese peasantry. And sort of the cultures they were producing under enslavement, right? And understanding how they were living, right? Back to YaYa's earlier point of how we understand how people were living as you now are moving through and then coming out of slavery, have enabled them to also have some of this power as well. And I think that's one of the things also that Castro and them are able to tap into in some ways. I mean, like Victor Drake, for example, is coming from one of these Black Cuban communities that have been fighting against imperialism and slavery and racism before Jose Marti, and so he's tapping into these things as well. I think there's powerful things that have been in some of these places to also think about that in a sense.
Respect. It's time for break. Stay tuned. Sunday Review will be right back.
Guatemala, this time we have the nobody give it to Guatemala. This time.
Emotions I'm feeling at the moment are very hard to explain. I am happy, want to cry, but something I can say that's mine now. So I'm very, very happy, and I'm grateful to the government, MIDH, for this opportunity. So thank you so much.
It's going to be something that changes dramatically Michelle's life and those of her children. And I'm very happy that as a government, we were able to provide this big step. Having a secure roof over your head gives you stability, gives children and parents a chance to focus on other things like education and health.
My daughter, she's very happy. She's finally to be able to say, this is my house as well. And my kids are happy, so I'm glad I have something for them. I believe it's a good project for people that can't afford a house, so I believe they should continue for people and give them the opportunities like they're giving me as well.
For decades, BEL has powered Belize's growth and progress, lighting homes, energizing industries, and fueling national development. But in a world reshaped by extreme weather patterns, digital transformation, and evolving customer needs, the future of energy demands a new approach. The future of energy is now, and it's not just about new technology, it's about people and how we use, manage, and store power smarter. BEL is leading the transformation, blending modern advancements with the wisdom of sustainable energy practices. Integrating technologies will redefine how Belize produces and uses energy. With distributed generation and smart grid technologies, customers are becoming power partners. Energy is no longer a one-way street. BEL is making key investments that will reinforce the grid to make this a reality, ensuring energy security for generations. At BEL, we are more than an energy provider. We work to safeguard Belize's energy future, which will have demand response programs, where customers will be able to shift use during peak hours to take advantage of the new time of use or off-peak rate structures, customer energy portals, real-time insights and tools to track usage and manage energy smarter, smart metering, advanced metering infrastructure, faster, safer service and actionable energy insights, distributed generation, integrating rooftop solar, microgrids and battery storage for two-way power flows into the national grid. Together, we are bringing you a brighter tomorrow.
Finally, a postpaid plan for 3 people. Introducing Smart Trio. Why pay for mobile service alone when you can share and save? Get unlimited national calls, texts, plus 100 gigabytes of shared data. And the best part? It's only $135. That's right, as low as $45 per person. Perfect for small families, couples, or close friends. Smart Trio. 3 lines, 1 smart choice. Sign up now and you could win a Trio getaway to San Pedro for 3. Visit us at www.smart-bz.com for more information or sign up at any showroom today. Smart, bringing people together.
At Atlantic Bank, your convenience is our priority. Our contact center is designed to enhance your banking experience. With a wide range of customer service options, you save time and effort. You can easily call in to block or unblock your debit and credit cards, perform account inquiries, and access detailed card information. Whether you need assistance with online banking, merchant support, or general inquiries, our team is ready to help. For added convenience, if all operators are busy, you can leave your number and an operator will return your call as soon as possible to ensure you receive the support you need. Depending on your transaction type, we may need to verify your identity through a set of security questions. And remember, Atlantic Bank will never request your username or password for Atlantic Online via phone call, text, or email, ensuring your personal information remains safe and secure. Our support team is available Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in both English and Spanish. Simply dial 223-1212. This is a dedicated line for our contact center. Atlantic Bank is committed to providing you with exceptional service and the tools you need to manage your finances conveniently and securely. Take full advantage of our easy-to-use contact center services today.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
Tired of replacing light bulbs? LEDs are what you need. LEDs last up to 30,000 hours. That's 30 times longer than incandescent bulbs, and up to 8 times longer than compact fluorescents. So less changing and less trash. Planet Earth thanks you. And the LED experts at Brothers Habet and Habet will help you find the best LED solution with colors for every room and mood, starting as low as $6.95. You can even get LED strips for home, office, and industrial use. So say goodbye to fluorescent tubes forever. And because they use up to 90% less energy, you save money. Money you can spend on other things. So head to Brothers Habet or Habet and Habet today. You can also call, email, or Facebook us. Have a brilliant day.
name is Poopa. Belize me come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Poopa. Belize me come from the Billy City area.
Second segment of Sunday Review for the first day in February and the first Sunday. You know, we follow the United States leading us so much things. So they say that Black History Month, but Black History Month at 24/7, 365 for as long as we breed as African descendants, specialized as Black people. So we have Brother Ako as our co-host, Brother Toivo as our guest. Brother Ako, next story up, we just did a number, what, 8? You got 10? Let's go run through there quickly, Brother Ako.
The next headline is
I'm not hear you.
Cuba. You're not hearing me?
Oh, because I don't got my news. That's why. Go ahead, that's my fault.
Okay. The next headline is coming out of Cuba. The headline is, even with fuel shortages, Cuba will not be defeated by the empire. The sub-headline is, surrender will never be an option, and hard times like these must be faced with courage and bravery, said the Cuban president. So I'm going to read a couple paragraphs and we can discuss it. Our premise will continue to be to prepare ourselves to move forward, even when aggression and restrictions become more acute. We are living in a time when imperialism is emboldened and has once again set its sights on Cuba with increased aggression, which grows with each passing day, denounced Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez, first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba and President of the Republic, on Friday morning during the extraordinary plenary session of the Provincial Party Committee in Havana. The head of state made an incisive analysis of the events that have unfolded in the region and the world since January 3rd, following the aggression against Venezuela by the US government, and which now threaten the island. Faced with imperialism's aggression against Cuba, whose direct lines of action have been clearly announced by Trump, Marco Rubio, and other spokespersons of the government, we, Diaz-Canel said, have to be prepared, and we are preparing ourselves. The president explained that these lines of action consist first of total suffocation, continuing economic pressure as reflected in the decisions announced Thursday by Trump on the blockade, through tariffs on oil, supplies to Cuba, and second, military aggression. You recall the comments made by the White House occupant in early January after the aggression against Venezuela and the kidnapping of his legitimate president, when he said that not much pressure could be exerted on Cuba, and that what had to be done was to go in and destroy the place. The first of these comments, when he said, I don't think much more pressure can be exerted against Cuba, Diaz-Canel pointed out, is confirmation of the extreme levels of pressure of all kinds that have been exerted on our country, although indirectly. Trump has had to acknowledge that we have resisted. They have applied all the pressure they can, and here we are. And that statement made with such arrogance debunks the lie that Cuba is a failed state, because they have had to acknowledge that the fundamental cause of the economic crisis the country is experiencing has to do with the pressure which they themselves describe as maximum. So I'll stop here and let's discuss this issue of Cuba, which Cuba made it very clear that it has no plans to surrender despite what pressures may be exerted.
Yeah.
But Antonio, go ahead.
I'll be more brief on this. I mean, you have just been there, and others have more. You've just been on the ground there more than myself. No, what I would say is, for me, when I talk about Cuba and some of what the lessons I want, at least the younger cats who I talk to and some of the people who I'm moving with, is how long it takes to build that kind of strength and confidence, right? That comes from 60 years of struggle that has been forged in a true people's movement, right? That's the strength and the confidence that enables them to do that. Right. And I think, one of the things that I think is interesting about because of the blockade, and because of how they've treated Cuba, right, has actually been Cuba has had to rely on the working classes and the working poor more disproportionately, precisely because they have been cut off and very much marginalized in the global community, particularly, of course, after the fall of the Soviet Union, right? And so for me, ironically, the Cubans are in a better position to defend some of what they have done than, again, and I'll say it again, the Colombians and the Brazilians and some of the rest there. I focus on some of those in particular, particularly Brazil and Colombia, and now Mexico. We have to bring into this thing as well, because what are you going to do? Like, this is where I think that there's what are you going to do, particularly with you in Mexico there and in Colombia, right? Because these things would not be able to be happening if you were all united, in a particular kind of way. As much as, one of the things I'll say that this, and maybe I'll close with this, and one would have hoped Cuba could have become this, but of course they fought so hard against this, right? Is that as much as we go on about us on the African continent having a certain kind of a Pan-Africanist vision and needing to have African unity, in that area of the Caribbean and wider Latin America, there is desperate need of Nkrumahism there too. Particularly with level, and I say Nkrumahism in particular because they seem to be determined to uphold a certain level of the state. But the question was, your Organization of American States or whatever this is, you can't be serious. There has to be a serious sort of alternative, right, to these kinds of things, or else you guys are you guys are living on borrowed time. Right. And so I think that it's a testament to the strength of the Cuban people, their allies, the class, race, cultural solidarities and things that have to be forged in order to make that possible. Even if, quote unquote, the Cuban regime were to, quote unquote, fall, the capitalists will find that you're not going to be able to impose some of your things on the Cuban people easily. Because the people are conscientized and the people are mobilized against some of this way of thinking. So you're just going to have another Haiti situation in some sense, where you're constantly having to wage war against the people to force them to be capitalists, or where and where you deem them in capitalism. So I think even if they fall, the people are strong enough.
And that's an excellent point that you made, Brother Toivo. The U.S. delegation that I went on December, January to Cuba was organized by two U.S. citizens who have been Cuba advocates, Sister Rosemary Mealy and Brother Sam Anderson. And I was struggling because we're going to do a report back, and so I was struggling to find the words of what this 5th visit to Cuba has been for me. And I was saying to Sister Rosemary, it's as if the revolution has birthed a different type of human being. Their whole being is wired differently from us. Now, the generation that took part in the revolution, a number of them have transitioned already. We met he's a brother who is in his 90s, who was a part of the revolution, very vibrant elder. But their mindset is very different from us here, most of us in the Western Hemisphere. So the confidence that they have in what they have already achieved, there are people who are literate, they study, and they're suffering. Now, because of these sanctions, even before the ones of this past week, there have been more people leaving the island. And so the economic blockade has real consequences. There are people who may need medical supplies, that they cannot get the medical supplies anymore. But there's still a mindset of, I need to take care of myself and I need to take care of my community. We talk about living in community to experience them living that as a natural way of life, even within struggle, under so much oppression. And it's because of the success of the Cuban Revolution that the United States has been afraid for over 60 years that they don't want any other country to follow that model. And that's why they keep coming back to Cuba in different ways. And these, if you listen to the recent reports, the impact it's having on people to have blackouts for as long as you have blackouts, for people who need medical attention, not have fuel. And so, there's garbage on the street. That leads to other public health concerns. There are real issues. You cannot import things to buy because of the impact of not getting remittances. The blockade shows up in everyday people's lives. Yet, and they're suffering. This is not what they want. Yet, their mantra remains the same for most of them. It's homeland or death. Now, how many people do you know, maybe other than the Muslims, how many people do you know who, when they say homeland or death, that are just lyrics, they're willing to die for their liberty, for their freedom, because they know as Cubans, they have the right to decide what is in their best interest. So, Brother Ako, besides the Cubans or maybe those who are followers of Islam, any other group of people that were one dead for what they believe in?
Well, not all followers of Islam die for an altruistic cause.
Fair enough.
A lot of it is religious indoctrination without any serious political project. And a lot of that sort of rhetoric that we hear are really of fanatics because, they get into power and then they impose the same capitalist system on the societies in which they live. Now, even though I admire the Iranians for its anti-imperialist approach, right? There are socialist and communist parties in Iran that led the struggle, and the clergy basically eliminated them. But to get back to your point, one of the most important points you made, and I took a note of it here, is the revolution birthed a new person, which is true. If you look at Che Guevara's small booklet, Man and Socialism, Not Socialism and Man, he speaks about the creation of a new man, which was a fundamental aspect of the Cuban Revolution. And so what the problem is that in the other parts of the Caribbean, because we are more or less neo-colonial states, we have never developed a social ethos or a culture that promotes real sovereignty and that transforms the colonial person into a sovereign person. It comes back again to sovereignty. We are still a colonial people, and C.L.R. James in a statement said it. He said we are African, but we are Western, right? And until we destroy that little being in us, that and return to our African self and our revolutionary self and our humanistic self, right? We will never understand the Cuban Revolution, And so the process has to be about the creation of the new person, because what we must understand is that part of the process of colonization, part of the process of capitalism and imperialism, is to destroy the humanity in people and to replace it with something that serves capital. So we call ourselves human beings, but at the end of it all, are we, in the true sense of the word, fully human beings, living in this place, not embracing new ideas? So the Cuban Revolution, you are correct, indeed did create a new person, and in the process of creating a person that is fully sovereign.
Respect. Come, we got 6 minutes for we can squeeze in our next story, Brother Ako.
We're about to close already?
6 minutes, no, to the second break.
Okay, all right, yeah. So, all right, this is a kind of tribute. This one is to an ancestor. One of the persons who have really not, and the headline is, he's an unsung Pan-Africanist. So I'm going to read this. It's written by one of our comrades here who has been on this show, Brother Nigel Westmas, and it appeared in the Ghanaian newspapers a couple of days ago. It's called Ras Makonnen, Unsung Pan-Africanist Pioneer from Guyana, right? And it begins with a statement that he made, and I think it is very relevant for these times. He made a statement in 1938. How can you have peace with empire He made this statement at a conference on peace and empire in 1930. And the headline, the article begins with, "In holding aloft the banner of Ethiopia, historian Winston James opines that the Caribbean, having produced one of the most mobile African diasporas in modern history, also generated a striking number of Pan-Africanist activists and intellectuals. His list spans in figures whose names have come to define the movement itself, including Edward Wilmot Blyden, Marcus Garvey, C.L.R. James, Amy Césaire, George Patton, and Ras Makonnen. Yet Makonen's, like Blyden, inclusion in this pantheon has not translated into equal historical treatment. Among these figures, Ras Makonnen remains one of the least examined, despite a career that placed him at the organizational heart of Pan-Africanism for more than half a century. Makonen's relative obscurity is perhaps not accidental. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he was not primarily a theorist or polemicist. He left behind no manifesto and no sustained body of political writing beyond his memoir, Pan-Africanism from Within. Right? As editor of the memoir, Kenneth King noted, historians of Pan-Africanism have tended to privilege the printed word over the less visible labor of organizing, financing, negotiating, and sustaining movements across borders. Makonen's political life unfolded largely in these spaces. He was a builder of institutions, a broker of alliances, a mobilizer of resources, and a problem solver in a moment of crisis. So that's the article, and I want Brother Toivo to comment on, because it's a very important figure in Pan-Africanism that we have really not given the kind of credit that it deserves.
Respect. Thanks, Brother Toivo.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Yeah, no, I was very happy to hear this. T. Ras Makonnen again, coming also from Ethiopia, Abyssinia, right? And some of these names there. No, I remember just doing my own reading about him, and very much, my advisor used to say you have some of those in the Pan-African tradition who you track through a particular written word, and there's others you have to find their praxis in politics in their movement. Right, in how they were moving and how they were mobile and how they were challenging ideas and doing certain things. And he's one of them, most definitely. I also, just given my studies at the time, and think a lot about Richard B. Moore also. And looking at some of the African Blood Brotherhood and some of these cats, particularly I look at them in a moment like this. I think of them in the Black Writers Conference in the 1960s, particularly Richard B. Moore and them, who are the seniors in the space, who are bringing a particular kind of a historical understanding to that Black Power moment, that where Walter Rodney would be introducing himself, in some senses, to a particular a global Pan-African audience, a Pan-Africanist leftist audience. Richard B. Moore would be some of the elders in the space who lent a certain kind of a historical experience and a geographical movement experience, experiential experience, not just like today with Twitter and looking online. These cats actually were traveling everywhere. If you look at Makonnen, you can write a book just on his travel log. Similar to like George Padmore and these cats. I mean, one day he's in London, next day they're in Brussels, then they're in somewhere else, then they're in New York, and then they're, the movement is really amazing. And that's actually what Pan-Africanism has always represented in many ways. And Makonnen represents that Pan-Africanism, an example of that grassroots movement, Pan-Africanism, right? Those of you perhaps who like your scripture, if you think of the difference between, say, Peter and Paul, right? You think of Peter being very much with the masses as he's spreading the word, right? He's always in the street, he's with the people, versus building a building or the church as an institution. His church is the people, you see. And Makonnen understood Pan-Africanism as with the people in that sense, which is why he was critical of some of the things that were happening in Kenya and in Ghana. Although he's arrested in Ghana, given some of the cool things there, he was already beginning to ask particular kinds of questions that I think were important, particularly to us now as we think of our AES people.
Big respect, brother. I appreciate that. Time for a final break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head.
We all know the importance of running water and proper drainage in your home. That's why we rely on a fully functional plumbing system. At Benny's, we have all the plumbing supplies and accessories you need. Our pipes, fittings, valves, and adapters are made from durable quality materials. Remember to wash your hands with clean running water from your faucet. We have kitchen and bathroom faucets in various styles and finishes. Whether for installation or maintenance, make sure to use recommended PVC cleaner, solvent, and Teflon tape to fix or prevent leaks. We also have the tools to get the job done. For all your residential, commercial, or industrial plumbing needs, shop at Benny's. Quality and savings.
Finally, a postpaid plan for 3 people. Introducing Smart Trio. Why pay for mobile service alone when you can share and save? Get unlimited national calls, text, plus 100 gigabytes of shared data. And the best part? It's only $135. That's right, as low as $45 per person. Perfect for small families, couples, or close friends. Smart Trio. 3 lines, 1 smart choice. Sign up now and you could win a Trio getaway to San Pedro for 3. Visit us at www.smart-bz.com for more information or sign up at any showroom today. Smart, bringing people together.
Emotions I'm feeling at the moment are very hard to explain. I am happy, I want to cry, but something I can say that's mine now. So I'm very, very happy, and I'm grateful to the government, MIDH, for this opportunity. So thank you so much.
It's going to be something that changes dramatically Michelle's life and those of her children. And I'm very happy that as a government we were able to provide this big step. Having a secure roof over your head gives you stability, gives children and parents a chance to focus on other things like education and health.
My daughter, she's very happy. She's finally going to be able to say this is my house as well, and my kids are happy, so I'm glad I have something for them. I believe it's a good project for people that can't afford a house, so I believe they should continue for people and give them the opportunities like they're giving me as well.
En Atlantic Bank, tu comodidad es nuestra prioridad. Nuestro centro de contacto está diseñado para mejorar tu experiencia bancaria. Con una amplia gama de opciones de servicio al cliente, ahorras tiempo y esfuerzo. Puedes llamar fácilmente para bloquear o desbloquear tus tarjetas de débito y crédito, realizar consultas de cuentas y acceder a información detallada de tus tarjetas. Ya sea que necesites asistencia con la banca en línea, apoyo para comercios o consultas generales, nuestro equipo está listo para ayudarte. Para mayor comodidad, si todos los operadores están ocupados, puedes dejar tu número y un operador te devolverá la llamada lo antes posible para asegurarse de que recibas el apoyo que necesitas. Para mayor seguridad, es posible que necesitemos verificar tu identidad con un conjunto de preguntas sencillas. Recuerda, Atlantic Bank nunca solicitará tu nombre de tu usuario ni contraseña de Atlantic Online por llamada telefónica, mensaje de texto o correo electrónico, asegurando que tu información personal permanezca segura y protegida. Nuestro equipo de apoyo está disponible de lunes a viernes, de 8 a.m. a 6 p.m., en inglés y en español. Simplemente marca al 223-1212. Esta es la línea dedicada para nuestro centro de contacto. Atlantic Bank se compromete a brindarte un servicio excepcional y las herramientas que necesitas para administrar tus finanzas de manera conveniente y segura. Aprovecha al máximo nuestro servicio del centro de contacto.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
electrical. We've got the paints and the brush and light fixtures. That's for sure. We've got steel, cement, and tiles galore. And so much more. We've got everything in that store. We've got windows and doors just for you. In our store. We've got sheetrock, plywood, and hardwood too. That's for sure. Tools for gardening in the great outdoors. And so much more. We've got everything in that store. We've got variety. Everything. Quality. Everything. Quantity. Everything. And builders hardware variety. Everything. Quality. Everything. Quantity. Everything. And builders hardware. We've got the sinks and the tubs and cabinets. In our store. We've got the nuts and the bolts, so don't forget. And so much more. We've got service with a smile. That's for sure. We've got everything in that store. We've got variety. Everything. Quality. Everything. Quantity. Everything. And builders hardware variety. Everything. And quality. Everything. Quantity. Everything. And builders hardware. For builders who build with a passion or skill, go to builders hardware.
Because patriots, all people who love them country bad, love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. Country bad, love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave.
Final segment of Sunday Review, Sister YaYa, Brother Ako, and Brother Toivo. I want to get your pronunciation in your name right one day, brother. Keep the practice, and Brother Ako, keep the hold me accountable. Brother Ako, go ahead with the other stories.
The next story is out of Venezuela. The headline is Venezuela approves pro-business oil reform as Trump issues new sanctions waiver. It's out of a Venezuelan news outlet. It begins with, under the new law, the Venezuelan government can discretionarily reduce taxes and royalties to ensure that projects are internationally competitive. Venezuela National Assembly has approved a sweeping reform of the country's 2001 hydrocarbon law that rolls back the state's role in the energy sector in favor of private capital. Legislators unanimously endorsed the bill at its second discussion on Thursday, with only opposition deputy Enrique Capriles abstaining. The legislative overhaul follows years of U.S. sanctions against the Venezuelan oil industry and a naval blockade imposed in December. National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez hailed the vote a historic day and claimed the new bill will lead oil production to skyrocket. The reform will make the oil sector much more competitive for national and foreign corporations to extract crude, it will report. We are implementing mechanisms that have proven very successful. Venezuelan acting President Delcy Rodriguez signed and enacted the law after the parliamentary session, claiming that the industry will be guided by the best international practices and undertake a historic leap forward. The text approved during Thursday's legislative session, following the meetings between Venezuelan authorities and oil executives, went further than the draft preliminarily endorsed 1 week earlier. The final version of the legislation establishes 30% as an upper bound for royalties, with the Venezuelan government given the discretionary power to determine the rate for each project. A 33% extraction tax in the present law was scrapped in favor of an integrated hydrocarbon tax to be set by the executive with a 15% limit. So I'll stop here and you get the gist of the thing that a new law has been passed that supposedly is pro-business. We don't know if this is, disinformation in terms of how the headline reads, but they are not the news outlet is supposed to be pro the government. But it's interesting that this is coming now in the wake of the attack that was launched. So.
Brother Toivo?
Okay, so I'm going to try to say a few things with this because I have a lot of deeper thoughts on this Venezuela situation, and so I think some of that will become evident in some of what I say. So there's two ways we could look at this, I think, from, if you will, like a black nationalist historical perspective, and then if you will, to just for the sake of just showing some differences, sort of maybe more of a Marxist-Leninist sort of 20th century Marxist-Leninist sort of take on some of these sort of things, right? So on the one hand, what you can have is you can look at Venezuela like many maroon colonies back in the day who were surrounded by the Europeans and had to make particular agreements, right? Haiti does very similar things. If you look at 1828 with Jean Boyat and others, he does agree to the indemnity in order to open the economy and break the blockade in order to sort of, as some Haitian scholars would argue, suppress the working class in Haiti that actually is stronger than this sanctioned government, right? But Haiti has to make some of these decisions, right? Palmeiras does something similar, right? Numerous colonies do this, right? And which doesn't mean we don't critique, but the question is to simply say there is a precedent in a certain tradition, right? And then in another tradition, for example, if you take other traditions, there is, of course, those who would say, sort of, whether you're Trotskyist or not, right? The idea becomes socialism in one country we have to protect, right? The idea behind some of the Trotsky's critique of Stalinism was essentially that, we have to protect the state, the country, when we have war hit from all sides, right? Which means there are certain capitulations we have to make that many people actually feel unfairly gets hit with Stalin, when even Lenin is sending Trotsky to make the agreement of Brest-Litovsk, which was a humiliating agreement where they have to basically give up all Ukraine, ironically, and a whole bunch of other things, right? That actually was very, very harsh. It's part of why people weren't as were unsympathetic to the Germans with the Treaty of Versailles, because they're like, you basically asked the Russians for an arm and a leg in Brest-Litovsk, right? So there is an argument for that there too, right? That we have to sort of protect these things in one country. And even if you go to the African continent and we jump forward, right? And think of Mozambique, right? What Frelimo is now is not what Frelimo was in the 70s and 80s, right? Particularly even if you think of what happens post Samora Machel being assassinated in the late 1980s, right? And others taking over afterwards, right? There are these interesting moments that the movement finds itself in, where certain decisions have to be made, and certain changes begin to happen. So there's interesting trajectories of things, I think, that we could look at when we look at this thing. Maybe what I'll close with in the last few seconds or so is sort of my own immediate analysis of some of this, is that, yes, part of the critique that many in the left did have of Chavez, right, was that he actually does not necessarily socialize, if you will, the oil industry, right? There's many in the more revolutionary wings of movements globally that said, no, the actual move is to close the oil fields, right? Just like the enslaved on the plantations burned the sugar fields, in this situation, you close the oil fields. Because environmentally, it's a hazard, but then also it's one of the major reasons why the capitalists are interested in the first place. Now, if you do that, you have to reimagine what you think sovereignty is and what you are able to do, right? And look at Haiti, because when you abandon a particular model, what does it mean to try to figure out something different, right? And you see this tension between state and nation, as Trudeau would call it in Haiti, right? So I think on the one hand, there is that. On the other hand, Chavez also was arguing in a realpolitik type of way that we have to fund and fuel these healthcare reforms to keep the roads up. People are urbanized. We do need international currency. We can help Cuba. We can help some of the African. There are things that we can do to you if we now manage this in a particular kind of a way, right? And so what we see in this law, on one level, you can argue, is a way to sort of liberalize the oil industry, right? But it was always very, very clear, right? Chevron is there, right? I think as the ambassador said a few weeks ago, Chevron is there. Even the other countries in the world that are having their oil things there, they're using similar technologies and logics, right? They're just abiding more by the sovereignty of Venezuela than the American capitalists would want to, right? So I think it's important to look at it in that context. And if you see the oil industry as a way to fund and to fuel some of the other social reforms, etc., right? Then some of the capitulations there on one level can seem not to be capitulations, but more realpolitik in a particular kind of a way, right? It is true about the investments in the oil industry. It is not enough. It is not optimal. It's true, right? And you can take that again however you want to take it. And so I think that again, the timing of all these things, of course, is of course suspicious in order to sort of give the appearance that it's the American initiative, in terms of telling them what to do versus them coming to these decisions on their own in some ways. And that we can of course have the debate on that. But I did want to maybe lay out those ways of thinking about this. That for me, the central question is what happens to the revenues once they come to the state and to the local social programs is more of the deeper question versus necessarily, shall we say, some of the laws governing oil extraction in Venezuela.
I really appreciate that comprehensive point of view and the different points of views. Oftentimes we don't have these type of deep analysis, and it's not that we have to agree with each other. It's just to share without judgment different positions. And I really value that position because it's something that we often don't talk about. Is wanting to want to be in power, but many of us do not know what it takes to genuinely build a nation and some of those tough choices that we would need to make depending on the type of model that nation choose in the best interest of their people. So sovereignty, we keep coming back to sovereignty and individuals in that country making the decision that is best for their country. So yeah, I appreciate that. Brother Ako, it's 11:47. We have about 10 minutes. You could squeeze in one more story?
Well, yeah. One other comment I want to make on that, I think Brother Toivo touched on it, the whole question of the oil industry. And one of the protests that took place a couple of years ago by the indigenous people in Peru, I think it was to stop the extractive economy. Because they said, look, this is destroying our sacred soil and so on. So the capitalist model is about extractivism in all over. That's the problem in Africa. So that's one thing we have to look at. Then there was a comment that was made by a critic of Maduro about 3 years ago. I was reading about it. And Maduro was meeting with some of the business people. And what this critic was saying is, we don't need less revolution, we need more revolution. You know? So you do have these contending debates taking place within Venezuela, not just now. I think it may have sharpened now, but it was happening then. So we are at a point where we have to see where this is going to go, you know. One other, Sister YaYa, the other headline is from St. Lucia, and the headline is St. Lucia medical students can no longer study in Cuba as U.S. pressure forced change. St. Lucia's medical education and healthcare system is facing a major shakeup as Prime Minister Philip J. Pierre revealed that local students can no longer study medicine in Cuba. Speaking at the Second World Congress of Racial and Ethnic Health Disparities, the Prime Minister cited U.S. geopolitical pressures as the driving force behind this unprecedented shift, while urging the diaspora on innovative local initiatives to help the country navigate these new challenges. So your comment, brother.
Maybe for YaYa to go first, and then I'll close off.
Okay, Sister YaYa.
Oftentimes, just because there's a war for our minds and we don't know where to get authentic news versus propaganda, we really don't overstand. Remember now, Cuba has been, and her people have been under a blockade for over 60 years. And it has a real cost on their lives. Like, they're suffering. People are dying. Yet they're still able to help us, students, families who never imagined their children could ever become a medical doctor, for example, have an opportunity to go, and it's not easy for them, especially if Spanish is not their first language, to go and learn a second language. Suffering too, because the reality is real. You might can't get toilet paper. It's a different kind of food. The food might not be enough for you to eat, but that's what Cuban people live with every day, not only for the lifetime of that person studying medicine. But then you leave, and what you leave with, you know, there was a slim chance that you could have gotten that if you didn't go to Cuba to become a medical doctor. And Cuba leads the world when it comes to medicine and intervention and healthcare. Whenever there's a crisis throughout the lifetime of the revolution, they send medical brigades. And so just imagine what a game changer that is. And now to tell St. Lucian students, you no longer have that opportunity. And it's for us to understand, especially in the Caribbean region, that we're living, many of us are living because of Cuban doctors, that we have an obligation to learn more about Cuba and her people. The Cuban doctors who studied there, that after you get your degree, you have an obligation to stay engaged, to continue to advocate for that blockade to be lifted, to organize, to take delegations, not as tourists, but as people who really want to learn so that we could become better human beings. So that is just, and then you have to ask yourself, how much of a choice did the St. Lucian government have? What other options do you have when you have a power like the United States? Brother Toivo.
Yeah, no, I'll keep this brief. Again, the Cubans in my village now in Namibia, we can go there and we can point to places where people who were trained by the Cubans and the doctors are now. And some of it's just a very, very rich history. And part of also which makes the Cuban health brigades and some of how they understand medicine and healthcare, right? Which is so important is also by necessity, it had to be very indigenous, right, in certain ways. And what I'm meaning is leaning into some of the local knowledges of people who have been having to take care of their health for hundreds of years, right? Who know in these ways, right? And I've also always felt to myself, and my father always said this, that part of what he felt with the Cubans when they train health professionals, it's always the way they train isn't to have your knowledge be insular. It is to share it. So if they train 50, the idea is you will train another 50. You see, like the idea behind the knowledge, how they are training is to train for independence and autonomy, but also to spread the lessons in those learnings. You see what I'm saying, right? Versus in the Western model, you get your degree as a doctor, and because you're in debt so much, you're so focused on making money to pay off the debt, you actually aren't really concerned about sharing your skill set. Right? If you think about it, right? You see, right? And so I think that this is also a way to kind of also understand how they are teaching people, right? And so now the ones who are Cubans who teach, who are known, who come back to our villages, they are teaching other people, and they are known in a particular way. Because our communities, if you look at African peoples, historically, a strong percentage of our leadership have always been healthcare people in some way, shape, or form, right? Toussaint has health skills. Harriet Tubman has health skills, right? Agostinho Neto, Angola, doctor, right? Samora Michelle, nurse, right? We always have a very strong healthcare tradition amongst our leadership, right? And so in some ways, it's also this attack of autonomy that also is happening with this in St. Lucia. And of course, for us in Namibia and other small countries like this who do send people there still now to get trained, I mean, we need to be watching these things.
Respect. And Brother Akko, I don't know if you know this. I just found out, I think they're called what are they called? In the United States, Freedom House, where black men were trained in the medical field because there was no other option available to them. And how they were pioneers when it came to, I think it's called CMS. Are you familiar with it, Brother Akko?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, and so again, it goes back to, in the absence of having a standardized medicine, people have to figure out, and in a way I think it's awesome because you're using traditional medicines, you're using traditional practices like as a midwife, you are doing it from a position of care, not as becoming one doctor, mean I want to make more money and I want to have access to more material. You really, and again, coming back to the revolution creating a new being, it's really about humanity, as Brother Akko shared. All right, I think that time for a parting chat is 5 minutes to 12. Brother Toivo, final thoughts.
Yeah, no, final thoughts for me will be just maybe just to pick up on where we were there. I think of the UNIA, right? They had the African Nurses Brigade in those days, right? And actually, if you look at some of the influenza epidemic, right? When the first time people had to do this lock shelter in place thing, if you will, in the West in certain places, right? Actually, it's very much the UNIA's African Nurse Brigades and them. Actually, they have the best rates of keeping people alive, in many ways, right? Because there was an understanding of the community health and how we have to move with these things. And they were very much in the forefront of keeping people alive in those moments, right? So even this Cuban tradition also comes from, again, from a rich tradition. And for me, I think it's always important for me is that part of these attacks of imperialism, it is the violence of the, 100 people killed in an assault, you know what I mean? Taking a president, kidnapping, there is that shock value. But part of what the idea behind the shock value is to make us feel that we need them to survive, right? That we need to have capital, we need to have these relations and these ways of organizing ourselves in order to survive in this thing. And so we must constantly also resist that by doing and building the things that they are saying they do not want us to build. That also is equally as revolutionary as also resisting some of the things that are being put against us to directly, right? We have to build these things that they're trying to tell us we can't build and that they're trying to destroy.
Big respect, brother. Brother Akko?
Well, my issue with this statement by the Prime Minister, and there was a tape, actually a video of the speech, in which he said, the great United States tell us, well, we can't do this. And again, it speaks to our sovereignty. What it clearly states is that you can't even make a decision that is in your best interest relative to health. And I think it's a dangerous sort of precedent. There are some things to me you must resist, and you should resist. And I think the issue of telling a country where your students could study or where they can't, you don't want us here. You're saying we can't come to the US. And even if we could, we can't afford it. So you are telling us we can't send our children where we want to study, and yet you are not providing any support to help us with that challenge. So for me, there are some things you have to stand up to. And I think the Caribbean should have banded together, everyone, Trinidad, Barbados, and said no, right? And deal with the consequence on that basis, And I am very disappointed in the response relative to healthcare. That's a fundamental right of people. So that is how I see it. It clearly says we have no sovereignty, our leaders have no spine, but because for me, there are some things you must stand up to. The economics, all right, I could see the impact of that in a certain way, what's happening in Venezuela, but you're talking about healthcare. That's like, to me, like telling somebody who either to get married to or who they should relate to. And healthcare is that personal. And I am extremely disappointed in that response from the Caribbean leaders relative to this situation, because all of these things are enshrined under the United Nations healthcare. And even if you couldn't, okay, they said you can't do that, what can you do then, in terms of getting the training of the Cuban doctors, band together and do something, have a response, rather than just roll over and say, well, the United States tell us. Because once you compromise on something as fundamental as that, they are going to come with something else, and you'll have to keep constantly bowing your head and accepting what is meted out to you. So that's my sort of position on that.
I want to give you thanks, Brother Akko. I'll give you the homework for that. I don't know if you're familiar with Operation Carlotta.
Yes, I am.
Tell us, Brother Akko, what was Operation Carlotta?
Operation Carlotta was the operation in Angola, okay, that in which the Cuban forces routed the South African racist apartheid forces. And the South African army at the time was considered like the top 8 or 9 top armies in the world. And Operation Carlotta destroyed the South African army. And Carlotta was an African slave, a female who led a rebellion against the Spanish authorities in Cuba. And so the Cuba one of the statements Fidel made when he sent the troops to Angola, he said, even though Cuba is part of Latin America, Cuba is also Latin Africa, in that African blood and heritage runs deep into the Cuban population. So Operation Carlotta was named after Carlotta, an African female slave who led a revolt in Cuba. And so it was aptly named that the Cuban Revolutionary Army went to Angola under the banner and with the inspiration of Carlotta to defeat apartheid and basically the white Western world in South Africa.
Big respect, Brother Akko. I tell you, I can't mess with Brother Akko, you know. When I Google it, you know, okay, I'm go with everything with AI. I said, well, ask Brother Akko first. So it said, Carlotta Lukume died 1844, was an African-born Yoruba woman enslaved in Cuba who led a massive 1843 enslaved revolt at the Triunvirato plantation in Matanzas. She became a symbol of resistance, and Operation Carlotta was the 1975 code name for Cuba's military intervention in Angola, supporting the MPLA against apartheid South African forces. Big respect. Well, thanks very much to our guest, Brother Toivo, and our co-host, Brother Akko. We want to thank the security guard, Rashjen, here at XTV. We have last minute, Christy had to get ready for me coming in the studio. We had Christy Flowers as the MCO, and then we have our MCO in training is Tasia Rikenia. And downstairs on the second floor, we have Larry G, known as Larry Guerrero. I had to say quickly that recently, did we discuss at any point SVG elections, Brother Akko? How they had lost after being in power for so many years? I don't remember if we did.
Yeah, briefly. I think that's the one you missed. You may have missed. And then today we were supposed to discuss something happened in Trinidad, in which the Trinidad up to yesterday was under a state of emergency, and the government brought legislation to create a different version of it called special emergency zones, in which they were going to police certain communities in Trinidad, take away their rights, which were basically and mainly African communities. So the government put this before the legislature, and it was defeated by the Senate. And so they could not implement that draconian piece of legislation. But hopefully next week we might be able to discuss it.
That has been something that has been normalized in Belize. Yes. So I wanted to recognize my sister. She's a Rastafari sister out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I met her in Venezuela, I think in 2019. She's now the Cuban ambassador, Sister Idisha Jackson. She studied in Cuba, but I'm proud of Black Rastafari sister, now the ambassador to Cuba for SVG. Big up, my sister. This show will repeat at 5:30 this evening on XTV. You could go to YouTube, XTV Belize, Facebook, XTV Belize, share the link, share the link, share the link. Also go to Instagram, Carlotta's Warriors, for Stay Pantapa. Again, the group of people that I work with out of the United States to continue to advocate for Cuba and her people, especially as it relates to medical brigades in the Caribbean. Again, thanks, Brother Tovio. Thanks, Brother Akko. Next Sunday, we should have here. So till then, remember say, remember Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and next week, we come out front of BTL for support the Belize telecommunication workers in a fight for justice, for make BTL pay their severance from 10 to 1 o'clock in front of BTL. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. 6 days, Friday plus 5. I know I wanted a firing line long with it. Until then, remember say, only organized people want to save the people.
Thank you, Brother Toivo.
All right, y'all.
Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master, talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Country bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation.